Welcome back to another episode of Table Setters covering all things Major League Baseball. As always, I'm Steve. Join my tag team partner, Devin. What's going on, man?
What's up? It's AL Central time, our fourth division preview, 4 out of 6 here. The AL Central, interestingly enough, is one of two divisions in which every team has won at least one World Series. Steve, do you know the other one? Other division?
Other division that has won, every team has won
Every
at least.
every team in the division has won at least one World Series.
Every team has won at least one World Series. So, I mean, it's bad pot if
A
I'm going to sit
riddle.
here and guess. I'm gonna think about it while I give you some of my information about what I think
Well,
about
think
this
about
season.
all right, so let me give you one more thing, and you can think about it more. So I won't tell you the other division. You
The
can think
NL
about it.
East is the other one. I got it.
There you go. There you go. Yes, the NL East is the other one. But in fact, each AL Central team has actually won at least 2 World Series championships. But I found it interesting that there's only 2 divisions where every single team has won at least once. If you asked me that without knowing anything, and I
For
just had
sure.
to pick a number, like within seconds, I would have picked more than 2, most likely. So we'll see. Maybe another one is added into that group this year.
People would have a hard time with the Marlins, I think. That's why they would get stopped on. I mean, I remember them
Casual,
vividly,
yeah.
obviously 03, obviously they beat my Yankees, but 97, like I think of those two Marlins teams as very, very vividly, but people that are just accustomed to baseball, the Marlins that are out there wearing that egregious jersey now, like those guys won 2 World Series, really?
Peter Bendix, like he's the GM. They're those guys won 2 World Series. Yeah.
Exactly. But we're talking about the 2025 AL Central here, as Devin mentioned. And this has been one of the more unpredictable divisions over the past decade. If you, Devin mentioned before, this has been up for grabs. You guys go check out our NL Central preview from yesterday. We did talk about how that division has been one of those divisions that have been largely unpredictable. But last year, we saw the Cleveland Guardians, the Detroit Tigers, and the Kansas City Royals all making the postseason in 2024. No team has full seized control at this point. I think we can agree on that. Recent years have been following that. And the Minnesota Twins and the Chicago White Sox, they used to be the division powerhouses. I feel like the Twins had their run here where everyone thought the American League Central, the rinse repeat was they win the Central, then they get bounced by the Yankees in the playoffs all those years. So that was pretty much what they did. But the stuff that we're seeing now, obviously, the Twins have fallen behind, but the White Sox have tripped, fallen, stubbed their toe, broke their leg, and now they're sitting there off of an 121 loss historic season in the worst way possible. Rock bottom's putting it lightly. That's as much as a storyline as it is at the top. How would a team be able to bounce back from something like we saw last year too? It's just as much of a conversation. As much as it was bad baseball, it became so bad, it became a storyline. You're not bad in anonymity at this point. You lost 121 games last year.
Yeah, man. Rough times in the South Side. That's my. So when I'm writing about these things, preparing for the episode, the first thing that came to my mind, I'm like, do I talk about these players, or is it more so just the White Sox as a whole? And my first question that I'm wondering is like, do White Sox fans have a reason or come up with a reason to continue coming to the ballpark right now? Like, do they have that reason, especially in the cold April weather or even end of March weather when the season starts? Will Venable, obviously, taking over the helm there as far as the manager. He's been a guy that I've heard his name for manager openings for years now. And finally, he gets his shot. It's a pretty tough position. But if you're Will Venable, if you can just get a few extra wins out of this club, I think you've done enough. And you just hope that they're playing a style of baseball, even if they don't have enough talent on the field. Hope that they play a style of baseball that is relatively respectable, where you're not just shaking your head every 2 seconds. Like, there's a difference between losing and you're watching the game and you're like, the other team is just more talented than we are. They're just better. They have more pieces. Like, we're playing a good brand of baseball. There's a difference between that and just the misery of being like, well, how are they going to lose tonight? And kicking the ball around and just, weak fundamentals. So if you're Will Venable, I think that's what you're aiming for this year. Like, let's put a respectable product out there. We're going to be outgunned, but let's be respectable. I think as far as players go, obviously the first name most people are going to watch this year is Luis Robert, because I think a lot of people expected him to be traded already. He's there. He had a miserable season last year, so I understand why maybe a trade wasn't made. I know there were offers made for sure. But they're probably not the offers that the White Sox expect for a 27-year-old, but still potential stud. We've seen flashes of it. We've even seen seasons of it. So I think their hope, as far as front office, what they're hoping for is Luis Robert and maybe a couple other veterans on that team go out and ball out so they can continue their rebuild and move these guys at the deadline. I think they're probably anybody over 25. I think they are open and they'll entertain offers for these guys, full youth movement. And as far as the young guys, Colson Montgomery, Kyle Teal, Miguel Vargas, who they got from the Dodgers, not as young anymore, but still a guy that is looking for that opportunity full time. We got to watch them to see if they're showing signs of hope for the future.
So we mentioned this in the NLS preview, talking about the Padres not getting the deal for Cease that they were looking for, and Luis Robert was more of the same. You potentially could have a bidder at the deadline that would overpay for Luis Robert, or maybe more at the price that the White Sox want, because ultimately they want to expedite this rebuild. As far behind as they are, it's a comprehensive rebuild. They are completely tearing it down. They want to be able to get pieces that can help them in the near future, but also extend the window when they are competitive to keep it open for a long period of time. And they're still at the early stages of this rebuild. So whatever ground floor they put in is going to be important before they return back to competitiveness. They want to make sure it's a prolonged period of competitiveness. That's not a 2-3 year window of being competitive. And then you have to tear it down again, because when you have this moment of clarity, and I've never been a fan of a baseball team that's lost this many games, but I'd imagine, being, I'm an Islander fan on the New York side of things. We've never had a historically bad season, but when you break it down, you want to make it worth it. And I think for the White Sox, that's the perspective. It's the only perspective you can have as a front office and a fan base. And you look at the over under win total here, and I'm going to toss it to you, 53.5, which is the lowest since 1990 as far as their projections going into a season. Even last year, they were a little bit above that. Do you think they get above 53, Devin, or are we looking at just around hovering underneath that? Is it a safe bet to take the under?
What was the record again last year? The exact record?
41 and 121.
Oof. So, and you said 53.5 is the over under.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to win another 13 games here. Oh man, this is tricky because you can stumble into some wins and you can play a little better.
That's why Vegas makes the big money, man. They
I
nail the
know.
number. It's such a perfect number, right?
I'm tempted to take the over, but just barely, just barely by the skin of their teeth.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much more to say about them here. I mean, their limited offseason activity was expected. I mean, outside of making deals to further the future here, they're going to be sellers if anyone's willing to buy it and give them the right price, and the transition phase will continue. But let's head to the top of the division and talk a little bit about what we saw with the Detroit Tigers. And I feel like they are poised for a competitive season here, a foundation that's well above the pace that we thought they would be, led by Tarik Skubal, and seeing what he did, AL Cy Young winner, absolutely fantastic season. You want to talk about having moxie on the mound? That's Tarik Skubal personified. And the underrated lineup too. I mean, Riley Green, of course, took that next step last year. Kerry Carpenter as well, and addition of Gleyber Torres, who, although got his, kicked out of New York and people were like, good riddance, we don't want you. Gleyber Torres was a big part of that postseason run for the Yankees. And at the end of the year, they're going to miss his bat. They really are, especially with, Giancarlo Stanton's out, 2 bum elbows. He's going to be out for the season. The Yankees could use Gleyber Torres, and Gleyber Torres, has a little bit of the swagger now. He's going to have a nice big beard. I know they can grow beards in New York now, but different type of beard in Detroit, the automotive industry type of beard. But Gleyber addition to this lineup, I feel like they got better, which is amazing to say, because I feel like they overachieved, and I feel like now the expectations are there. And that's the biggest thing, Dev. I think, how do you manage that when you have expectations? Because it's so easy to go in, because it felt like Tigers are house money. They're expected this year to be good. People are going to be showing up to the ballpark on any given night expecting their Tigers to win. No more surprises. They're not catching anybody off guard. They're not sneaking up on anybody. Everybody understands the Tigers are who they were last year. And that's a hard crown to wear sometimes.
It is. Yeah, they completely caught people off guard, came out of nowhere last year. I agree with that. It's a different beast when now you know how good you can be and everyone else knows it. You're not going to sneak up on anyone. The offense to me, I know you said you like the lineup. It's a little more of a question for me, and that doesn't mean I don't think the potential is there. I do think Gleyber Torres is going to flourish in Detroit. He's super motivated still. He says he took this 1-year deal because he wants to land $100 million deal next offseason. Like, he's got a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, and I think Detroit, I could see him out of the New York spotlight actually doing very, very well. Javi Baez, don't look now. I think some people expected just to say bye to him, just eat his money. There's been some improvements in spring. So you never know. Listen, Javi Baez, I know he's become a joke, but once upon a time, he was a major piece of the 2016 Cubs that broke the curse defensively, but he also had his offensive moments as well. So he might come back here with a little chip on his shoulder. Listen, these guys, they'll tell you they don't read anything, but they know what's being said about them. They see the memes and the videos and stuff like that. So who knows what you get out of Baez here. And if it doesn't work, you have other young pieces like a Trey Sweeney that can play more of the time at short and kind of take that time. Riley Green is the X factor for me for sure, especially offensively. There are people, I get it. When you watch this kid and he barrels the ball, it's one of the prettiest swings you'll see. But he is a little streaky at times, and he's had some injury issues. I hear people talking about him as like a future MVP. I don't know if I'm there yet with Riley Green. Like him a lot. Love the player. Love the potential of the player. I still think there's some unseen potential at this point. But like, I got to see a little more. And then the other guy, former another one prospect, Spencer Torkelson, fell off a cliff last year. Which Spencer Torkelson are we getting this year? Are we getting the 30 home run guy from a couple years ago, or are we getting the guy that was sent down to AAA last year? It looks like he'll be mainly the DH, I think, so he can just focus on his hitting there. He's been tattooing the ball a bit in spring. And again, it's spring training. How much stock do you put in it? But it's better to see that than the opposite, than the continued struggles. So offensively, I think there's questions. The rotation, I love the rotation. You start with Skubal, like you mentioned. I loved the Jack Flaherty signing for him and the team. He's shown he can do it there. Kind of was reborn there into the Jack Flaherty that we knew from years ago when he first was up with the Cardinals. Reese Olson, just a guy that, you're going to forget about half the time. And then you're going to watch him pitch against your team and be like, this guy is great. And then you go down Casey Mize, another guy who looks incredible in the spring, like a completely different pitcher. And again, don't forget this guy was also once a super highly touted prospect. So it's not exactly coming out of nowhere, but their entire pitching staff, I love. And I do wonder about some other guys as far as depth, if they need other pieces, which most rotations do when someone goes down for a little while. Do you remember the name Sawyer Gibson Long from 2023?
I do, yeah.
I wonder if they get anything from him because he came out of nowhere and struck out a ton of guys in his debut. And I remember Pitching Ninja put out some videos showing some of the overlays of his pitches, and it looked like, holy crap, this guy's going to be the next big thing. And he goes down with an injury, and we kind of forget about him for a year, which happens to guys. I wonder, there's other pieces there too. I mean, even a Matt Manning, who once was highly touted and now seems to be in anonymity, kind of up and down. Like, so they do have a little bit of depth in the rotation as well. And as far as bullpen goes, I mean, AJ Hinch showed he has no issue mixing, matching, pitching chaos. So I didn't even look at, not that I didn't even look at the names. I don't think I have to look at the names. AJ Hinch has me convinced that you give him 7 or 8 guys in that bullpen and he'll figure it out.
Yeah, all the spots that you mentioned there, I agree with 100%. And AJ Hinch was going to be the person I bring up as well. We did spend last night's episode, I should say, talking about Terry Francona. And I think AJ Hinch brings that same type of intangible factor to the Tigers for good reason. It's the in-game management, but it's also what he brings to the table. Because you got to remember, I mean, AJ Hinch is a formidable manager from his time in Houston. He was a player's type of a guy that obviously things that went the way they did in Houston. They had to disband everyone and move him around. But AJ Hinch, he's a franchise guy that you want behind on the bench. Like he's your guy. And fortunately for the Tigers, obviously he had to rebrand himself over in Detroit instead of staying in Houston, because if things didn't go awry or they weren't caught or whatever happened, we have AJ Hinch in Houston. There's no way he's being let go. He is a transcendent manager in game. And once you have that guy, you don't let him go. And the beautiful part about Hinch, it feels like he's getting better, and it feels like he's able to manage these younger players and get the maximum out of them. It's no coincidence that we see career years out of some of these guys because under AJ Hinch's tutelage. And I think more of what we said about Cincinnati with Terry Francona, we saw it in Cleveland, of course. We saw it in Boston. He continues to do it. But I feel like that's what we're going to see. I think the Reds and the Tigers are in similar spots where you
Yeah, I
can you
see
can
that.
literally see that AJ Hinch brought the Tigers. I mean, Francona can bring the Reds maybe this year. It might take a year or two because it didn't happen overnight. But I love all the points
Reds
you made.
Tigers. Reds
What was that?
Tigers World Series. That's, I mean,
Oh,
to a
I was
hardcore baseball fan, it's appealing. I don't know if it's appealing to the casual
no
unless they
man.
see Ellie De La Cruz
We just woke Manfred up in a cold
Skubal.
sweat. He was upset. Manfred woke up upset. We are proposing that and putting it out, manifesting it. But looking at just this whole team, and you mentioned Spencer Torkelson, and this would have been a bigger story if things were going poorly because of his draft status and his highly touted prospect nature.
Yeah.
Like Torkelson's the guy that everyone thought he'd be. You know what I mean? Everyone thought that Torkelson, you can build around him. Sent down to AAA, embarrassed by it. We had Eat 'em Up Tigers on the pod, and he was talking about there's rumors that Torkelson isn't as coachable as you'd probably want him to be. There was conversation that he may not even make the team this year. It seems like he broke camp with them. He'll be there with them, but there's no guarantee he's going to stay with the club because, as we mentioned, I mean, Torkelson hasn't earned anything. I mean, nothing's coming his way. I feel like the first couple of years he was there with them, they were like, okay, you can rest on what you were, and what you are. We think you're going to be, but at this point, we saw what they did with pretty much without him last year. So what?
Yeah.
Why are they waiting anymore?
I think there was a lot of people that thought maybe he'd be traded, he'd be in a new place, and kind of that scenario of like, we know this kid's talented, and he might just need a change of scenery, but they're going to give him another shot here. And just one other thing I want to mention before we move to the next team, to go back to the pitching staff. I mean, Jackson Jobe, I hope he breaks camp with them. And remember, like, there is this motivation now for these clubs to have guys like that start with the team from the get-go, because there's ways you can get extra picks basically from promoting these guys earlier. He had a great quote the other day. I think he struck out Vladdy, and he was asked about it afterwards. And I think this was the quote where something along the lines of, "I'm tired of trying to dot a gnat's ass. I'm tired of trying to dot a gnat's ass with the fastball or whatever." And he said, "I'm just going to throw my stuff over the plate, and if you can hit it, great. I don't think you will be able to." Something along those lines. Not an exact quote, just to save myself a little bit, but it's close. It's close. I love that. Like, I was already a Jackson Jobe fan just from what he can do, but then seeing kind of the attitude come out a little bit, the personality. That's another reason I like this staff. Skubal is a fiery guy. He and Flaherty feed off of each other. Like, you can tell they have a great relationship. When Flaherty came back, there was some things back and forth. They're pumped up. You add Jobe to the mix now as well. Like, that could be the five: Skubal, Flaherty, Reese Olson, Casey Mize, and Jackson Jobe. Like, if those guys are all right, that's a hell of a 1-5. And then Riley Green, just to finish up on him, looking at the baseball savant, like, I do understand why there are calls for him as a future MVP. There's a lot of red on there. What I'll look for to see if I think he's taking the next step, because there's a lot of 85th, 90 percentiles. The blue is squared up percentage is only 27th percentile. His whiff percentage still a little bit too much, 26.8%. His K percentage 26.7%. If those numbers come down a little bit or improve a little bit, and the power numbers don't suffer because of it, then I can see, like, oh yeah, the ceiling is pretty high for this kid. So Riley Green, for me, the X factor of the Tigers.
Yeah, absolutely. Riley Green has been an exciting player to watch grow, and I think he's going to take an even bigger step this year. So that's awesome to see. But the Cleveland Guardians, of course, entered this season as well. They got some of the established talent. We're talking about emerging prospects as well, and they are right now aiming to defend that American League Central title. We have to start with Jose Ramirez. I mean, he is the cornerstone of the offense. We've seen what he's able to do when he's healthy and when he's right. This is a guy who narrowly missed the 40-40 club last year as well. So obviously everyone talks about Shohei and what he did, but Jose Ramirez quietly puts up numbers in the American League. I wouldn't say anonymity, because if you're a diehard baseball fan, you know who he is and what he does, but he's elite. He goes out there and he grinds every single at bat out, and he's a game changer. And on top of that, you got the pitching rotation. Tanner Bybee, standout pitcher last year as well. He contributed significantly to the Garden's success. Gavin Williams, love what he brought to the table, bringing some depth. And let's not discount Shane Bieber. I mean, I know he undergone Tommy John last year. You know, he's going to miss the first half of this year, but it feels like he's motivated. Like there's the Instagram clip that he posted, I believe, on his Instagram, where he knew something had gone awry with his knowing he needed Tommy John. Like something had snapped in his arm, and he's just like, it's over for me. And there was a moment of clarity, thinking that I may not be able to do this again. So now he's back on a 1-year deal. Obviously, his home has been Cleveland. They know exactly who he is. They're giving him a shot. I feel like he's motivated to come back and contribute in a big way. And then what do you say about the shutdown closer, Emmanuel Clase? Understand it came off at the end of the year and the big home run against him, but extraordinary last year. This guy is just an absolute monster, firing at all cylinders. He is lights out in a world where closers, you mentioned AJ Hinch mixing, matching, and finding ways. It's very rare we have those shutdown closers, and Emmanuel Clase is a world above a lot of these closers out there. I understand people will look at the moments where he blew it last year, but I mean, this guy is more of the pitcher where he goes out there and shuts you down. He's almost unhittable.
Yeah. To go with Clase, my only thing, you talked about the postseason last year where it was rough, really rough. I mean, the Yankees exposed him seemingly. What I'll be looking for in the beginning of the season is just see if there's a little bit of a hangover from that. Has it affected him more than we think it might? I remember it clearly did at the time. Remember he was like on his Instagram, like putting pictures of like all the stuff he's earned, like in awards he's won or something, or jewelry. I don't know. I forget what it was. It was really weird.
He was
It was
posting
really
all
strange.
the reliever of the year awards. He was posting like all-star game stuff. Like,
yeah, that's like a post that someone who's a little damaged makes. It's like, dude, we know you're good. Like no one is all of a sudden saying you're trash. You had a rough series. But I do wonder if there's any of that. And there's already been rumors of Cleveland eventually looking to move him because they're not going to want to continue to pay him. And unfortunately, that's what Cleveland has become for the most part, other than Jose Ramirez. It's like, obviously you saw it with Francisco Lindor. You get to a certain point of stardom, and it's like, all right, we're not going to pay you, though. We can't pay too many guys. So I hope that's not the case because obviously he's become an absolute, lightning rod there. But you mentioned Gavin Williams. He's one guy I find fascinating. Very high prospect. At one point, kind of compared, the comp was to like a Garrett Cole, like eventually kind of morph into that kind of guy. Pretty high praise. He's interesting. So coming into this year, his minor league strikeout percentage across his minor league experience, 33.3%. In the majors, 23.6%. It's just, and that's 32 big league starts. So still a pretty small sample size, but he's just not been the same guy at the major league level, which you can attribute to it. Hey, that shows us how big that AAA to major league jump is. And we've seen that a lot the past few years. I mean, look at Kobe Mayo on the offensive side. Everyone just thought this guy was going to come up and hit 40 home runs. And obviously he hasn't gotten that much of a chance, but even in spring training this year, it's been rough. He looks like he needs to snap out of it. So Gavin's had some of that on the pitching side. I will say spring has been very encouraging. Sunday struck out 7 batters over 3 2/3 against the White Sox. I know it's the White Sox, but he's been doing this all spring. The Tuesday before that, 6 strikeouts in 2 1/3. Like that's impressive. That's the strikeout kind of ability that we expect that we just haven't seen that much of at the big league level. So I think he is so important because you mentioned Bieber. We don't know when he's going to be there and how much they're going to get out of him, and if they have to kind of handle him a little bit with kid gloves, or if he's going to want himself to be handled with that because he wants to go back in free agency healthy. So I thought it made sense for him to sign there. But like how much they get out of him this year, I'm not sure we know. I believe in Tanner Bybee at the top. I don't know if he's proven he's like an ace of aces yet, but I think he's okay there at the one spot. I think he's going to be really, really good. He already has been, but I believe in him as the future. I don't love the rotation as a whole. I mean, you go into it right now with Bybee, Luis Ortiz, who, like, depending on the guy you ask, some people think his ceiling is pretty high and you're going to see more. Cleveland get more out of him, and they think it was a genius trade to get him there. And others that think, like, he's going to be the guy we saw in Pittsburgh, where one day he wows you and the next he's getting rocked. The aforementioned Gavin Williams, good things in spring. Let's see if he can bring it into the regular season. And you got Ben Lively, maybe Tristan McKenzie getting another shot, who's another guy. Like, can he be the guy we thought he was going to be? But I don't love it. I don't love the rotation. I love the bullpen because there's just nastiness all over. We mentioned Clase, but Hunter Gaddis, Cade Smith, these guys are pretty damn good as well. Adding Paul Sewald was interesting. I think the biggest strength of the Cleveland team, and I don't say this about many teams, the biggest strength about the Cleveland Guardians is their bullpen. I think they know how to use them. The guys are absolutely nasty. So that's my strength. And on offense, listen, here's the thing, man. Here's the problem with trying to make predictions preseason. There's a little bit of short-term memory where you haven't actually watched the team on the field a little bit in their style of play. And you look at these names on paper and you're like, okay, Jose Ramirez is awesome, but like, who's going to help him? Like, that's how I feel. Steven Kwan, obviously, big Christmas will hit some bombs. But overall, I look at the names on this offense and I'm kind of like, God damn, if Jose Ramirez has a little bit of a down year, these guys are not even going to sniff first place. That's how I feel looking at this.
Yeah, I mean, Josh Naylor being sent out, Andrés Giménez
Yeah.
being sent out. They have not replaced them. Naylor is a key power bat in the middle of that lineup, and Giménez's exit affects both the offense and the infield. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like there's
defense,
a defensive nature to that. If you look at the ETAs for the young hitters, Travis Bazzana and Chase DeLauder, I feel like they're gonna be contributing this year in major roles, or they almost have to be, because although there's a lack of MLB experience, we've seen that. We've talked about the pipeline from going from where you are in college and getting to the major leagues. Drafted in 2024 for Bazzana. Like, he is a player that is going to be right on the track here. ETA, like I said, is 2025. They may not break camp with the team, but I would be shocked if we're not going to see both those dudes in the lineup. And they're expected to do a lot. You know what I mean? They're going to be expected to not just ease into it. If the Guardians want to do anything this year offensively, unless they go out and potentially target a bat to bolster the lineup, which I don't think they'll do. I mean, they added Carlos Santana, and that's not enough. It's not enough to contribute and potentially win this division crown. So I think point being is Travis Bazzana and Chase DeLauder, if they come up, it's like, nah, no warming up, dude. We need you guys to contribute in a big way. And I love the poise of Travis Bazzana. Every level of college you've seen him, this is a different type of player. I feel like he's going to be a guy who's going to take the MLB by storm. And you mentioned Matt McLain being a household name by May or June. Dude, Travis Bazzana, if he gets up here with just his accent, everything about him, he could definitely be a star in the making. Baseball loves international flavor too. Like, there's something about Travis Bazzana that's infectious.
Yeah, it's 70 grade hit tool. And for those maybe not familiar, 80 is the highest. 80 you almost never see. 75 you don't see very much. 70 is, there's not that many 70 grade hit tools there. I think they're going to want to see, and he's even said, like, his main focus is improving his defense. I don't think they're going to want to make the same mistake that maybe it wasn't a mistake. It depends on how you look at it. But like, if you see Jackson Holiday and the hype train and they brought him up and maybe he was too fast and he's kind of halted a little bit because of that, that might be a little bit, that might hold him back a little bit.
But the difference, I think, is that Cleveland will give him a chance to play every single day. I know Jackson had a chance to play every single day, but there was an uncertainty sliding scale of what was going on in Baltimore. No one really knew their place. I feel like if Travis Bazzana goes up there, it's Jose Ramirez's team, but like secondary is like kind of Travis Bazzana right behind him.
Yeah, and that'll be fun once he's here. And I think the other guy, until Bazzana gets here, you mentioned Santana, his counterpart, Kyle Manzardo, who they acquired from Tampa last year, they're going to need him to hit some bomb. Like, they're going to need him to be an extra base guy. Like, when he's out there, when he's starting, they're going to need him to do some damage, because you look up and down as far as the thump. Like, why even pitch to Jose Ramirez? Seriously, like, why pitch to Jose Ramirez with the guys that are around him? That's how I feel. And maybe they'll prove me wrong. They're another one of those teams, pesky teams, are going to try to put the ball in play and play fundamentals. But again, similar to what I said about the Brewers on the NL Central episodes, like, how long can you continue to just like send guys away and let guys walk out the door and not really make a huge effort to replace them and expect you to continue succeeding just because of the style of play you play? I think that wears thin eventually. Like, you look at the Diamondbacks, and yeah, they let Christian Walker walk out the door and immediately replace him with the aforementioned Josh Naylor. These other teams, sometimes they let him walk and they just expect like, next man up. Sometimes it works, and I don't know. Eventually, I think it's going to bite him a little bit. But yeah, Bazzani, I'm excited about him as well.
So let's move to the Minnesota Twins here. They enter the season aiming to rebound after what was a disappointing 2024 season. All told, obviously, in the shadow of what happened in Chicago, it's not as bad finishing 82 and 80. They had a really strong start. If you remember, they did suffer a late season collapse, not historic by any nature, but they lost 27 of the last 39 games, which eventually put them out of playoff contention. So looking at the Twins is, there's a lot of potential here where you look at some of this stuff here and kind of the same conversation we continue to have. I mean, I want to circle Carlos Correa on here when healthy. He has an impact. Obvious. His bat is a pivotal figure in that lineup. And injuries have been the aforementioned thing that continue to get in the way of Carlos Correa being out there. He'd be a New York Met if it wasn't for injuries at this point. So with the Twins here, they're going to be relying on him heavily. And that's an unfortunate thing that you have to put that much pressure on a Carlos Correa because it feels like we're emerging into the sunset of his career. The other thing is Byron Buxton. I mean, he was limited to 102 games. Injuries have always been a question for him. So what are we going to get out of Buxton? He feels like he's electric when he's on the field. And the addition of Harrison Bader was interesting as well. I mean, they had a quiet offseason, and he does bring some defensive stuff as well. It doesn't match what the upgrades that Detroit and potentially Cleveland have in-house already. But I think they also brought in Ty France as well. Modest improvement to the lineup as well. So this is not going to be game changer. I mean, they're not going to be out there doing enough to potentially compete with the division rival, any of these teams. But at the same time, there's potential breakouts. The same way I talked about the Cleveland Guardians and Travis Bazzana. You got Walker Jenkins and Emmanuel Rodriguez anticipated to make their debuts in the later of the season. They could provide a boost, at the very least, bring people out to target field and be like, hey, I want to check this team out. Because Walker Jenkins, I mean, this guy is becoming on the tip of everybody's tongue as far as being excited about. And Emmanuel Rodriguez, same thing. So I'm a sucker for stashing these young players and liking and watching their growth. But, Walker Jenkins feels like he's a name we're going to be very familiar with soon.
Yeah, Luke Keeschel as well. I feel like I always butcher that name. Keeschel. It's like Keaschall. Like there's just so many letters. I don't know. But he's gonna be a hell of a hitter in my opinion. I don't know when his time will be. But we'll see. Yeah, you're right. They have some pieces. Brooks Lee it sounds like gonna start the season with them. So maybe a full season of Lee as well. Tons of potential too. So they've stacked these hitting prospects up for a while now. But you mentioned it, man. Like the main story, the main idea for the Twins is the health of the guys you mentioned: Carlos Correa, Byron Buxton, Royce Lewis. All these guys are studs, and we know they're studs, all-star caliber players when they are out there. But how often are they out there, the three of them? How often are the three of them out there at the same time? Just doesn't seem to happen very much. Royce Lewis is a spotlight for me. I mean, 11.2 barrel percentage, can crush the ball when he's right. 36.3 percent as far as launch angle sweet spot percentage, which is a mouthful of a stat, but a one I like. The bat speed's good. There's some things that he needs to improve even when he's out there. I mean, namely the chase percentage, whiff percentage still can use some improvement. We'd like to see him maybe walk a little bit more. But the guy is such a threat when he's out there and he's at the plate. So he's the main guy I watch along with the other two, Correa and Buxton. The pitching staff is interesting. I wonder, here's the interesting thing about the Twins. Fell apart last year, as you mentioned. Most fans, or even people like us, podcasters, people writing, I don't feel like many people think that highly of the Twins this year, mainly because maybe they just didn't change much and the result last year wasn't that good. So why would we expect something great this year? But a lot of like computer projections have them finishing first in that division. Like there's multiple projections I've seen where the Twins win that division, and that caught me by surprise. I wonder if those computer projections are wrong and they're not where they want to be. I was looking at their roster thinking like, who might they try to trade away? Now, to me, I know Correa has been mentioned in trade rumors. I just don't know how that contract is tradable, knowing his health stuff. Like I don't see that. Buxton, if he proves he's healthy, maybe because he's such an athlete out there. To me, the one that stands out as Pablo Lopez, veteran starter. Like, what are people always looking for? Veteran starters. He's got like a few years left on his contract. It's not like he's an impending free agent. So like the value would be extremely high. I think for them to convince themselves to do it, it's like, well, are we going to like, why don't we just try again with him next year? Kind of like the Blue Jays have done with their guys, like a Gaussman and a Chris Bassett. Like, oh, let's try one more year with them. Like, let's not get rid of them. But they do have some young pitching to speak of that, like, seemingly is ready and maybe without a spot right now. Like Zebby Matthews, a Festa. Like, there are guys out there that may or may not be in the rotation when the season starts. So like if they do fall out of it, I wonder if they entertain the possibility of moving a Pablo Lopez if they get some offers that they like.
Yeah, and I guess that's the thing in Minnesota that they're looking for, similar to what we talked about with St. Louis on yesterday's episode, is just a direction about where they're going. It's not like
Yeah.
they've been resistant to spending money in the past, but I guess similar to what we talked about with the Rockies being burned by Chris Bryant, feels like the Twins are a little bit burned by spending money on Carlos Correa, and that's the risk of doing these free agent deals. They may not work out, but it also makes you a little bit gun shy in the future. And we've seen them tighten up the pocketbook really drastically since that point. And I think they recognize when obvious they can't play ball in the market with some of the free agents. So they went out and spent the big money on Correa. You mentioned that deal not being tradable. But it comes down to getting the right people in the front office to assess these free agents. Because I think, as I mentioned before, the Mets had a deal in place. They didn't like the physical. They sent him back
Giants as
packing it.
well.
And the Giants, same thing. And Minnesota decided to take the risk on it. And well, look what happened. Everything that everybody thought would happen happened. So, we'll continue to see what happens with Minnesota. But
Do you
let's move to
think
the.
Baldelli, just quickly, do you think Baldelli is on the hot seat if they have another disappointing year?
I mean, the same conversation we had about Aaron Boone and a different pressure situation, but who are you replacing him with? Unless there's an heir
Sure.
apparent, I think Rocco has shown enough from his time in Minnesota to get the max out of the team. So I don't think he's on the hot seat quite yet because the expectations are low outside of the computer projections that are saying they're going to win. But I would say in Minnesota, if you poll the fan base, I think they're just looking for next steps and for people to stay healthy and then roll the dice. I don't think there's like a World Series or bust situation going on over there.
Okay. Okay.
Why, you think he's someone that's on the hot seat?
I just think this goes back to saying, like, when I look at their roster, like, what could they do as far as like trading people away and stuff? And for the most part, I just feel like it'd be minor moves. And to me, when you kind of have a few disappointing seasons in a row, I feel like they itch to make some kind of change. And if there's no obvious change other than a little bit of a youth movement player wise, sometimes it's the manager that takes the brunt of it. Like, I'm not blaming it on him, but I just wonder what the feeling there is for Baldelli. I feel like he's been there for a while now, but we'll see. I mean, you never know what they're thinking in the front office as far as that goes.
And at the very least, the storyline that's been threaded between both these divisions that we're covering is they're open for someone else to take. And there are
Yeah.
obvious hierarchies as well. Like, we know who's the haves and have nots, but the Twins are not too far of the have selection to not be considered in the race if they would have made the right moves. And I think that's the frustrating part. It's not Rocco's fault, of course, it's the front office's fault. But as you mentioned, there's a lot of talent on that field that is already there. So if you are the front office, like, listen, we gave you guys this field of talent, make it work. So we'll certainly see what happens at Minnesota. They're going to be a team to watch. And at the very least, they'll be one of the best looking teams in baseball. Their uniforms always, I mean, I love their uniforms. So
The Twin Cities uniform, I love that one.
fantastic. So the Kansas City Royals, looking at what they did here, and everything is aimed on crosshairs on Bobby Witt Jr., rising superstar. He is one of baseball's premier talents at this point. I mean, where do you even start? Second consecutive 30-30 season, Gold Glove and Silver Slugger award. His defensive prowess, he's offensive, and he's excellent in all capacities of the game. Uh, and for the Royals themselves, I think you can look at Seth Lugo, Cole Reagans, and what they did. But as much as baseball is a team sport, there is a lot about having a superstar. And you can't help but think about the nature of the turnaround here, where they improved from a 106 loss season in 2023 and went on to secure a postseason berth the next year. And you have to attribute that at the very least, not 100% to Bobby Witt Jr., but there's a large majority of that share that goes with Bobby Witt Jr. because I think he makes everybody around him better. And the sky's the limit for Bobby, and we'll talk a little bit more about him because I think you have a lot to say about him as well. This is a guy that we haven't even seen the best of yet, and the sky is the limit. I mean, this is a guy who, had 32 home runs last year. I think he can have more. I think this is a guy who is a dual threat as well on the bases. I think he can have more stolen bases. I don't think we've seen the max out of Bobby Witt Jr., and that's scary for the rest of the league.
Dude's absolutely great. You nailed it when you said, like, not only is he great as an individual player, but he does seem to be the rare guy who makes everyone else better around him, which is not easy in baseball. In like a game like basketball, when you can pass the ball and set picks and assists and things like that, it's easier to make guys around you better because you're like directly connected to them. In baseball, not as when you're up there at the plate on offense, yes, it's a team game, but it kind of becomes almost an individual game a little bit on the offensive side. But he does seem to make everyone around him, and I just think it's because these guys are excited to play with him. Like, he's that kind of talent. Very, very rare. I like the team a lot. If you've listened to Table Setters for a while, you've probably heard me before sing the praises of a JJ Piccolo being aggressive in that, quote unquote, other people call small market. Maybe no such thing with these billionaires. So I love what they've done. They've just kept their foot on the gas and been smart about how they do it, and locked Bobby Witt up as well, which is great. Like the rotation, front end especially. You mentioned Reagans and Seth Lugo, Michael Wacha as well. These guys are pros. The back end of the rotation, you might be a little worried a little bit. Michael Lorenzen, fifth spot seems to be up for grabs. Alec Marsh, Daniel Lynch, Chris Bubich might be in there as well. My biggest concern, I think the rotation is good enough, especially at the top. I don't know how well they could sustain injury. And we know usually parts of the rotation get banged up through the year, if not worse. I mean, those names I just rattled at you, they can certainly fill in, but filling in is one thing, giving you some innings is another. Like, being effective is a whole different ball game. Kyle Wright, I would call him the forgotten man. Okay, one-time Atlanta Brave 20-game winner. He, for those of you who don't know or have forgotten, is a Kansas City Royal, and he is coming back from a big injury, and he already hit a little bit of a speed bump. I think he had some kind of hamstring strain. So again, he's working his way up again. I wonder what they get from him, if anything. He, at once upon a time, was an extremely bright spot in the Atlanta Braves pitching staff, and then injuries got him. Can he work his way up to be even part of what he was that year when he won 20 games? That would be huge for the Kansas City Royals. So pitching depth is one thing I'm focused on. I really, really like the lineup. I'm maybe more than most people. I just think it's well-rounded. And my favorite guy, aside from Bobby Witt in that lineup, I could go Salvi, but it's Vinny Pasquantino. I feel like he is the perfect kind of Robin to Bobby Witt's Batman. Like, he's just the perfect complement. And part of the reason I feel that way, when you look at his baseball savant, good amount of red, but specifically the ones that are red, whiff percentage, K percentage, he's in the 96th percentile. Bat on ball guy. When you have a Bobby Witt, you want someone around him in the lineup that can put the bat on the ball and has some pop. There's plenty of guys that can put the bat on the ball and have no pop. Vinny Pasquantino is that guy that can do both. So I love him there. When he went down, I believe it was the unfortunate wrist injury last year in the second half of the season, and eventually came back, I think, for the playoffs. But that was such a big hit. And at the time, and he was starting to roll too before that. And at the time, I think most people thought this is going to push them out of a playoff spot. And they were able to squeak in there and make a run. That series against the Yankees that I believe they lost in 4 games, those games were close, man. Those games were close. Like, it's deceiving when you just look at the series, like final, 3-1. But Pasquantino, he's such a key to them. Bobby Witt's going to go out there and be Bobby Witt. Salvi Perez, another year older, but he's probably going to go out there and be Salvador Perez. Vinny, I'm looking forward to seeing what he does. I think he could have a huge year. One of those guys that's sneaky under the radar, but so important to that offense.
So looking at the bullpen as well, I mean, they addressed it as a weakness on their end. They went out and got Carl Estévez, stability at the back end as well. Hunter Harvey as well is still in there. And there's some pieces. There is a little bit of a lack of depth in the high leverage situations as well, which, obviously maintaining leads in this division, like there were a lot of close games in the division in this game. So this bullpen is going to be very important. And it's hard to put a lot of stock in what a bullpen is until you see it come to fruition. All these guys feels
Yeah.
like a year after year, you don't know what you get outside of, like, as we mentioned, Emmanuel Clase, you kind of know what you get with him, but sometimes people just emerge out of nowhere and they become an elite reliever. So it's hard to put stock in, and you have to have, I guess, some faith in the culture of the Royals that they're able to turn some of these guys in the middle of the bullpen, like an Angel Zerpa or a Chris Stratton or Sam Long, and make them legitimate relievers. It wouldn't shock me. That's how it goes here, as long as you can throw hard and throw strikes. I love Vinny P as well. MJ Melendez as well, and he struggled at the plate last year, so he's going to be a big piece here if they can at least get a little bit more out of him as well. I think for the Royals themselves, it stops and starts with Bobby Witt Jr. They did strengthen some of the areas, and they're going to be relying on everybody taking a little bit more of a step forward, which is okay. And not to mention Jonathan India. Like, we didn't talk about Jonathan India
Yeah,
yet.
that's right. Yeah.
He's the leadoff hitter, batting right before Bobby Witt leading in. He'll be DHing on most nights. So Jonathan India feels like a quiet acquisition that almost would feel like he definitely feels like a Terry Francona type of player, and obviously spent a lot of time in Cincinnati. But Jonathan India, big fan of what he brings to the table. Some of the projections on his end, a little bit sparse. I think you could probably expect with a veteran presence in that lineup, especially batting in front of Bobby Witt Jr., he'll definitely get opportunities and pitches to hit. Uh, and I don't know. I think Jonathan India is going to be a sneaky, nice little acquisition here. And then Salvi Perez, he's another year older, but at the same time, Salvi has shown that he has the fountain of youth. I think we're
Yeah.
going to see Salvi go out there, and until he says, I'm done playing, I fully expect Salvi to go out there and be a legitimate cleanup hitter on any given night.
Yeah, I like the offense, man. Like, I think there's a lot of people that would disagree with me, but I think aside from the Twins, if they're healthy, I think this is the best offense in the division. And obviously top heavy with Bobby Witt there, but like I like some of these other pieces. Even like a Hunter Renfroe could be a sneaky ad. Like, he had a bad year last year, but in this offense, like, we know the dude has pop. You need some pop in the middle of that lineup, along with a Vinny P and a Salvi and guys like that. Like, I think it has the potential. And I think part of the reason the Twins are projected by some of these computer models is because those projections are based on the roster being healthy in front of them. But like, as fans and watching this, like, we know there's a good chance that the Twins are not. The Royals, man, I like it a lot. And only other thing I'm going to add, like you mentioned Travis Bazzana for the Guardians. How about Jack Caglione for the Royals? This dude, we've seen him mash at Florida in college, but he's come up here in spring training. This dude looks like a grown man. I think most people thought his timeline was 2026. I don't know, man. I don't think he'll start with the club by any means, but like, if he tears it up for a couple months in AAA, if that's where he starts, and they need a little pop, get him up here, man. Find a spot for him.
Do you think we see a 40-40 season out of Bobby Witt Jr.? Is that asking too much out of him? I know we had 32-31 last year. 40-40, is that reasonable to ask for?
I think it's reasonable. I think the potential is there. If you're asking me, like, would I bet on that? No, I don't know if it's. I don't see it, but he could come out here and just absolutely tear it up. I certainly think he's got the ability to do it, and if that's something he wants to do and thinks it's best for the team, and yeah, sure.
Yeah, and I look at all the Fangraph steamer projections for Witt, and all of them have him getting better. And what you have to take in consideration is everybody's excited for what we saw last year, and replicating the dominance of last year will be challenging. But I think all projections, no matter what model you buy into, anticipate him having at least 32 home runs and almost 100 RBIs, which is good for potentially competing for an American League MVP. And that's all you can ask for. He is one of the most dangerous hitters in the AL. And on top of it, I understand that for fantasy purposes and what sells tickets sometimes isn't defense. This guy is projected for 7.4 defensive runs above average. So he adds value all over the field. And I know we're like sitting here waxing poetic about Bobby Witt Jr., but
I love
everybody
him.
should be excited to be watching him play on any given night. It's
Yeah, man. Like,
His upward trajectory, I don't know if anyone expected it to be this quick, because everyone it's hard to put ourselves time and place when guys come up and they're highly touted and they come up with some pomp and circumstance. And he certainly did. But I don't know if we expected it to just flip on a dime like this. All of a sudden he became one of the best players in baseball. The other person I think of is Gunnar Henderson, where it happened so damn quick.
yeah, and I loved what I saw at the end of the season, at the end of that Yankee series. He was like the last guy in the dugout, kind of just staring. And I think it was actually Giancarlo Stanton who came out and kind of like gave him a pat on the back, which was classy. But just it's one thing to be a star, but like you love to see these stars like him and Ellie as well, and Skeens that clearly care so much and are still, even though they're already stars, you can tell there is such an effort to just continue that upward trajectory, like nothing's being taken for granted. And I love that. And that's why I think the game is so healthy, not just because we have stars, but because of what type of people those stars are. They're in good shape for sure. I guess to wrap up here, we always wrap up with our predictions as far as 1 through 5 finish and our ultimate X factor, the one person for the division, and also how many playoff teams. We didn't do the playoff teams yet. How many we think are going to come out, right? So
Not
we
for
can
this
do
one, nope.
that. All right. So I'll go with my AL Central predictions here, and this one's interesting. I think if you ask 10 people, you'd have maybe 10 different orders to this, and this is one of the only divisions I feel that way. So I'd be shocked if you and I have the exact 1 through 5 for this one. One, and maybe you could tell from the last 10 minutes or so, I'm a Royals guy, man. Royals are winning this division this year. There's so many people out there that are saying they like peaked last year and overachieved. I think they're just getting started. I think they're going to win the division and surprise people here. I see the Tigers finishing second, and this is where maybe it gets surprising for some people. I have the Twins finishing third, which means, yeah, I have the Guardians falling all the way to fourth. I think this is the year they fall back a bit and underwhelm. And the White Sox, obviously, fifth. So Royals, Tigers, Twins, Guardians, White Sox. The top 4 is very difficult to predict. Those teams are so close. Health matters a lot. Playoff teams, I'm going to say 2. 2 come out of here, and that's going to be the Royals and Tigers. I believe for the AL West, I had only the Rangers coming out, which leaves 3 spots for the AL East when we predict that. But yeah, so Royals, Tigers, Twins, Guardians, White Sox, Royals, Tigers make the playoffs.
So I have the same division winner here, as you guys can tell. I think Bobby Witt Jr. is my X factor, and I believe we're going to get more out of him this year, and that's even exciting to even think about. I have him winning the division. The only difference is I have the Guardians above the Twins. That's the only difference I have in here, and I also have the same 2
Interesting.
playoff teams as well. I don't and I don't disagree wholeheartedly. Again, like I think you can mash up some of these teams at the bottom and shuffle them. And would I be shocked in July that they're topsy turvy outside of the Chicago White Sox? Like every other team, I'd be like, okay, I could see how they're competitive at the end of the year. The White Sox are the only team that would shock me if they're any sort of semblance of competitive, but anything's better than what they did last year for the White Sox. So,
Yep.
but yeah, I agree with you. I think this is really exciting. And I went back and forth with the Tigers and the Royals as we were talking about it. I'm like, do I want to switch my pick? But I had the Royals from the jump. And a lot of these picks I go with my gut and
Yeah.
obviously the analytics and studying the numbers and feeling of just at the end of the year, like we want to revisit this. And I wish we had more of the adversarial conversation of like disagreeing vehemently with each other. But I mean, one of the reasons we do this show and we're, able to coexist doing this is we're very much like-minded in a lot of ways. So we both have been kind of on the same page for all these divisions. I think we had every division winner the same outside of the AL West, right? AL West, I had the Mariners and you had the Rangers.
You might be right. Yeah. And I will say I didn't give my overall division X factor, forgot that part. I usually try to limit it to one person, but I have to say, for me, it's the Twin Stars. There's a reason they're projected to win the division in a lot of places by computer models. And it's because if those guys really are out there for a whole season, like, yeah, they're probably the best team in the division. Is there any part of me that thinks those 3 dudes are going to all put together healthy seasons? No, there's zero part of me. But if it happens, I think everything changes in this division.
Yeah, and we definitely will be talking about this division every single week here on this show. And the model of our show is going to be definitely interesting because last year, obviously, this is our second season doing this, but the way we cover, obviously, doing 2 episodes a week mostly, or one episode a week. We're not covering blow by blow, play by play. It's more of the interior storylines of hot streaks and storylines going on in baseball. And I have a feeling that a lot of the storylines are going to thread through the Central here. There's a lot of conversation, young players, bounce back seasons. There's a lot of, great topics of conversation that we could literally just be an American League Central podcast and have a lot of meat on the bone to have discussion. So it's, as you mentioned, star power in baseball is very healthy, but discussion and candor are very healthy as well, where good, bad, or indifferent, there's things to talk about.
Yeah, and it'll be fun to look back at these predictions and see how accurate or how far off base we were. But you got me excited with the Travis Bazzana stuff and now the Jack Caglione stuff. Like, man, this division could be really fun for a while now. Man, Jack Caglione, if he turns out to be the guy that he's shown flashes of, you put that with Bobby Witt, holy shit.
What a division.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll be back on Monday, dropping our NL East preview, of course, talking about everything with Juan Soto and his Mets. The Phillies, the Braves are coming back for a revenge tour and what's going to happen there, and all the great NL East talk, who's going to survive the dogfight that the divisional race is destined to be. And on Tuesday, we're going to be talking about the refurbished American League East. There's a lot of conversation about the American League East the last couple of days. Garrett Cole going down with Tommy John surgery, missing in the 2025 season. Does that change our picks for what the division will foretell? Maybe, maybe not. Do we feel like the Yankees have enough in the tank to withstand the injuries to Luis Gil, Giancarlo Stanton, and also now their ace, Garrett Cole? Stay tuned for that. We'll be talking about it on the 18th. And of course, we'll be talking about the preview of the Tokyo series. So we're going to do a two-part there where in the same episode, we'll just preview. There's not so much to talk about. We'll have lineups and stuff, and we're just excited to talk about baseball that's tangible on the field. And yeah, we'll be previewing that, and then we'll be back on Wednesday for an MLB prediction special. We're going to be touching on that Tokyo series, that first game, give our MVP, our Cy Young, and some playoff predictions. Of course, we have our playoff members throughout this if you're kind of keeping track and scoring at home. But we're going to give some bold takes and some things we think were going to happen and just continue the discussion. So 2 weeks full of content, 6 divisions until we're 4 through. We're going to talk about the Tokyo series, which is going to kick off the season 2 weeks prior to it actually getting started, and kicking off our full second season of baseball, which is amazing on this platform that we call TableSetters.
Yeah, man. I think our birthday is coming up soon, our 1 year. I don't know the exact date, but I'll have to take a look. And yeah, getting towards 70 episodes. At some point this season, we'll hit 100, which is pretty crazy, the century mark. But yeah, if you guys like what you hear, subscribe everywhere you can. If you're enjoying it, recommend it to a friend. 5-star reviews, especially written ones, written word, really, really help go a long way. If you haven't subscribed on YouTube, go ahead, do that. Even if you're not really planning on watching us very often and you're more of a listener, it still helps us out. So we appreciate all the help and the support and the retweets and the quotes and the likes and the listens that we get. It does not go unnoticed.
Absolutely. And I definitely reiterate what Devin said. And we'll be back next week talking all things divisional preview. And don't worry, we'll have some guests on very, very soon. We have a lot of those guys in the docket, a lot of great baseball ahead of us, warm weather, and we're looking forward to it. So until that time, we will talk to you after a while.
High fly ball into right field. She is gone. In a year that has been so improbable, the impossible has happened.